Please take a moment to close your eyes. Try to recall the very specific, warm scent of a freshly brewed pot of filter coffee, slowly dripping on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Listen closely in your mind, and you might just hear the rhythmic, heavy ticking of a large wall clock echoing down a narrow hallway. Welcome back to a time when life moved at a different pace. Today, we are taking a gentle journey back to the Netherlands of the 1970s and 1980s. We are going to rediscover 20 everyday objects that used to be the heartbeat of absolutely every Dutch home, but have now quietly slipped away into the shadows of history. As we walk through these memories together, I want you to remember the feeling of your childhood home. And make sure you stay with me until the very end, because the final item we will remember today holds the power to bring all of our most precious, sunlit family memories vividly back to life. Sometimes, when we look back at the past, people try to tell us that life was simpler because we had less. But you and I know the truth. Life was not poorer back then. In many ways, it was profoundly richer. The hours of the day seem to stretch out longer, filled with a quiet, comforting rhythm that modern life has completely forgotten. Time was not something we constantly try to save or beat. Time was something we lived within. Waiting was a natural part of existence. You waited for the postman to bring a handwritten letter. You waited all week for that one special television program to air on one of the 2 available channels. You waited for the kettle to boil on the gas stove. And because we had to wait, the reward was always so much sweeter. The true wealth of those decades was found in the unmatched feeling of coziness, that deeply Dutch concept of being together in a warm, warmly lit room, shielded from the cold wind outside. We did not stare at glowing screens in our hands. We looked at each other. We talked, we listened, and we shared the space in a way that felt entirely genuine. Let us gently open the door to that past, step inside the living room of our youth, and look at the beautiful things that surrounded us. Let us begin our journey in the chilly hallway, where the undisputed king of communication sat heavily on a small wooden table. I am talking, of course, about the classic grey or green rotary telephone, provided by the National Postal Service. Do you remember the sheer physical weight of that plastic receiver in your hand? It was practically indestructible. Making a phone call back then was a deliberate, almost ceremonial act. You had to place your finger in the plastic hole, pull the heavy dial all the way to the metal stopper, and release it. Then, you waited for that mechanical, whirring sound as the dial spun back to its starting position. You had to repeat this for every single digit. If your finger slipped, you had to hang up and start the entire process all over again. The cord was always stubbornly thick and coiled, and no matter how much you tried to stretch it into the living room for a bit of privacy, it would inevitably snap back. Calling someone was expensive, so conversations were purposeful. The telephone was not a toy, it was a lifeline to the outside world, treated with a strange kind of reverence. Moving into the living room, our eyes are immediately drawn to the walls, specifically the wire shelving units painted in bold primary colors. These open shelves, often featuring a black metal frame holding up red, yellow and blue metal plates, were the absolute height of modern interior design in the early 1970s. They felt incredibly optimistic, bringing a splash of cheerful modernism into homes that were slowly shaking off the dark, heavy wooden furniture of the post-war years. Do you remember what your mother displayed on those thin metal shelves? Perhaps a row of cheap paperbacks, a small ceramic vase, or a tiny prickly cactus sitting in a plastic pot. Dusting those shelves was a weekly chore, requiring you to carefully lift each small object, wipe down the brightly colored metal, and place everything exactly back where it belonged. They were fragile, but incredibly striking. Looking at those primary colors today instantly transports us back to an era where the future felt bright, colorful, and neatly organized on a geometric wall display. Now let us step into the kitchen, a place of ultimate practicality and deeply ingrained Dutch frugality. Hidden in a drawer was an absolute masterpiece of household engineering. I am talking about the bottle scraper. It was nothing more than a long plastic handle with a flexible, half-moon-shaped silicone tip. But oh, the money and the food it saved! When the glass bottle of thick vanilla custard or plain yogurt was nearly empty, you never simply threw it away. That would be an unthinkable waste. Instead, you took out the scraper. You pushed it deep into the narrow neck of the heavy glass bottle, and with a satisfying, squeaking sound, you pulled the rubber edge along the glass interior. It gathered every last sweet drop, rescuing enough for one final, delicious bowl. Using it was a lesson taught to every child. It taught us to value what we had, to never be wasteful, and to respect the value of a hard-earned penny. Even today, the sound of rubber scraping against glass brings back the sweet taste of Sunday evening desserts. While we are in the kitchen, let us sit down at the table. It is breakfast time, and the table is set with the most iconic, comforting tableware imaginable. You know the pattern. It featured thick, hand-painted floral designs in vibrant red, green and blue on a creamy white background. It felt rustic, traditional and incredibly welcoming. Every morning, thick slices of brown bread were placed on those beautifully painted plates, generously spread with butter and completely covered in chocolate sprinkles. The ceramic cups were heavy, warming your hands perfectly on a frosty winter morning as you drank your hot tea. The paint on the edges of the plates would often chip over the years, leaving small, dark scars that just added to their character. This tableware was the silent witness to thousands of rushed school mornings, quiet weekend breakfasts and late-night cups of warm milk. It was the ceramic soul of the family kitchen, representing a sturdy, unbreakable bond that tied the family's daily routines together. Back in the living room, sitting heavily on the coffee table or standing tall on its own chrome pedestal was an object that defined the atmosphere of the era, the mechanical push-down ashtray. In those days, living rooms were often filled with a thick blue haze of cigarette or cigar smoke. It was entirely normal, a sign of relaxation and adult conversation. These metal ashtrays were fascinating pieces of engineering. When the tray was full of ash, you pushed down hard on the black plastic knob at the top. Suddenly, the metal disc beneath would drop down and spin wildly, swallowing the ash and the crushed cigarette ends into the dark belly of the container with a loud mechanical whirring sound. As children, it was incredibly tempting to push that button just to watch it spin, even when it was empty. On Sunday mornings, it was someone's grim duty to unscrew the top, empty the foul-smelling contents into the trash, and wash the metal parts until they shined again, ready for the next evening of visitors and endless conversations. High up on the kitchen wall, securely mounted to the tiles, hung another mechanical marvel of our youth, the manual coffee grinder. It usually had a white porcelain hopper decorated with a small blue windmill or a delicate landscape, a black iron crank, and a small glass cup at the bottom to catch the grounds. Making coffee was not the push of a button back then. It was physical labor. You poured the dark, oily roasted beans into the top, closed the lid, and began to turn the handle. It required real effort. You could feel the resistance of the beans cracking and crushing beneath the heavy metal burrs. But the reward was immediate. The intense, intoxicating aroma of freshly ground coffee would instantly fill the entire kitchen, signaling the true start of the day. The rhythmic crunching sound was a comforting morning lullaby. The coffee brewed from those fresh grounds tasted rich, dark, and hard-earned. That grinder was a beautiful marriage of form and function, a daily ritual that demanded your time and rewarded your senses. If you looked toward the large living room windows, trying to catch the afternoon sunlight, your eyes would inevitably meet a hanging forest. Suspended from the ceiling were thick, intricate webs of knotty jute or coarse cotton rope. These were the macrame plant hangers, the absolute pride of any household that wanted to feel a little bit bohemian and deeply connected to nature. The rope was incredibly scratchy to the touch. Inside these woven baskets sat heavy ceramic pots holding ferns, spider plants, or the ever-resilient snake plant. Creating these hangers was a popular craft requiring hours of tying countless square knots. As the sun set, these hanging gardens would cast beautiful, complex shadows across the walls. They made the room feel organic and alive. Sometimes a stray leaf would drop onto the carpet, or a bit of water would drip from the bottom after a generous watering. They were more than just decorations. They were living sculptures that brought the breath of the outside world directly into our cozy, enclosed living spaces. Speaking of the walls, we cannot ignore the dominant aesthetic force of the decade, the wallpaper. Oh, the incredibly bold, unapologetic wallpaper. It covered the rooms in dizzying geometric patterns or massive, repeating floral prints in shades of burnt orange, mustard yellow, and deep, muddy brown. The paper itself was thick, often slightly textured, almost feeling like fabric under your fingertips. It was incredibly brave interior design by today's standards, but back then it felt wonderfully warm and enclosing. In the evening, when the heavy curtains were drawn and the orange-tinted floor lamps were turned on, those brown and orange walls seemed to glow. They absorbed the light and created an atmosphere of absolute safety and warmth. Staring at those repeating patterns while lying on the couch with a mild fever is a universal childhood memory. You would try to trace the endless loops of the flowers with your eyes until you fell asleep. That wallpaper was loud, it was proud, and it defined the visual landscape of our youth. Let us pause at the kitchen table again, where the administration of the household took place. Every month, a familiar blue envelope arrived, and inside were the pale blue payment cards provided by the postal bank. Paying bills was a slow, deliberate, and highly tactile process. You had to sit down with a good pen. You carefully wrote down the account number of the recipient, ensuring every single digit was perfectly legible within the tiny printed boxes. Then, you wrote the amount, both in numbers and spelled out in letters. You signed it with your best, most grown-up signature. After filling out several of these thin, stiff paper cards, you placed them inside a specially designed envelope with a little window, licked the flap to seal it, and walked it down the street to the nearest mailbox. There was an incredible sense of trust in this system. You trusted the postman to deliver it. You trusted the bank clerks to read your handwriting, and you trusted the money to arrive. It made spending money feel real, heavy, and consequential. When visitors arrived on a Sunday afternoon, a very specific and unbreakable cultural ritual took place. After the coffee was poured into delicate cups, the host would produce a large, beautifully decorated metal tin. This was the biscuit tin, the keeper of sweet treasures. The lid often fit very tightly, requiring two hands and a bit of force to open, releasing a sudden, glorious wave of buttery, sugary air. The tin was offered to each guest, and the unwritten rule was absolute. You were allowed to take exactly one biscuit. Maybe a sweet, crumbly shortbread or a biscuit half-dipped in rich chocolate. Once everyone had made their single selection, the lid was firmly pressed back into place with a definitive snap, and the tin was placed safely out of reach on the sideboard. It was an exercise in discipline and modesty. We did not eat an entire package of sweets mindlessly. We savored that single cookie, letting it melt slowly in our mouths, while we listened to the adults discuss politics, the weather, and neighborhood gossip. With the arrival of spring came a sound that echoed through every street and alleyway. It was a sharp, rhythmic, explosive sound. Thwack, thwack, thwack. This was the sound of the rattan carpet beater. Heavy wool rugs and Prussian-style carpets were dragged out of the house, thrown clumsily over a sturdy clothesline in the garden or over a balcony railing. Then, armed with a beautifully woven teardrop-shaped tool made of tough rattan wood, the adults would strike the carpet with surprising aggression. With every hit, a massive, thick cloud of grey dust would explode into the crisp morning air, catching the sunlight. It was hard, physical labor that made your arms ache, but there was something incredibly satisfying about physically beating the winter dirt out of your home. When the rug was finally carried back inside, it smelled remarkably fresh, infused with the scent of cold wind and sunshine. It was an essential ritual of purification, marking the end of the dark months and the beginning of a brighter season. Deep in the hallway cupboard, or perhaps in the cold basement, lurked a device that held the power of warmth and comfort in its mechanical grip: the coin-operated gas meter. Central heating was not a given, and keeping the house warm required constant vigilance. This heavy metal box had a slot at the top, hungry for specific, heavy coins. You knew exactly when the meter was running empty. The flames in the gas heater would suddenly flicker, turn weak, and die out. A sudden chill would creep across the living room floor. Panic would ensue. Someone had to frantically search the drawers for the correct coin. You rushed to the meter, pushed the cold metal coin into the slot, and turned the heavy, satisfying rotary handle. With a loud mechanical clang, the gas flow was restored. You would then run back to the heater, strike an edge, and wait for the joyful whoosh as the blue flames roared back to life. That meter told us the literal cost of warmth. Comfort was not invisible. It was something you bought, coin by heavy coin. If your home was built in the 50s or 60s, your bathroom or utility room likely featured a massive, immovable object that served a dozen different purposes. It was a very deep, uniquely shaped sink made of cold, rough, artificial stone. It looked somewhat like a strange, oversized bathtub cut in half. This was the ultimate utilitarian station. It was incredibly deep, making it perfect for soaking heavily soiled work clothes or muddy football uniforms. But its uses went far beyond laundry. Because it was so large, it frequently served as a bathtub for babies and small children. Imagine sitting in that cold, stone basin, the warm water rushing out of a thick chrome tap, splashing happily while your mother scrubbed your knees. It was tough, unforgiving on drop glassware and completely unglamorous. Yet it was the hard-working center of household cleanliness. It was an object completely devoid of luxury, designed purely for survival and practicality in a busy growing family. Let us return to the stove for a moment. Before electric kettles ruined the poetry of boiling water, we relied on the whistling tea kettle, often made of gleaming, polished stainless steel that reflected the entire kitchen like a curved mirror. It sat proudly over the blue flames of the gas burner. Making tea was a slow, escalating drama. You filled the heavy kettle with cold tap water, placed it on the fire, and then you went about your business. But you had to listen. Slowly, a low hiss would begin to build. As the water reached a rolling boil, the steam would force its way through the tiny metal cap on the spout. The hiss would transform into a low moan, and finally into a shrill, piercing, undeniable whistle that demanded your immediate attention. You would rush to the stove, turn off the flame, and carefully pull the hot cat back to pour the boiling, bubbling water into a brown ceramic teapot. That whistle was the universal sound of a pause. It meant that work was stopping and comfort was about to be poured. Next to the heavy rotary phone in the hallway, there was almost always a clever little mechanical gadget. It was a flat, rectangular box made of plastic and metal, resting securely on the table. This was the pop-up telephone index. On the front, there was a slider that you could move up and down alongside the letters of the alphabet. If you needed to call your aunt, you move the slider down to the letter of her name, and then you press the magic button at the bottom. With a sharp, spring-loaded snap, the metal lid would pop open, revealing exactly the page you needed. The pages inside were lined and filled with a messy, chaotic mix of different handwritings. Names were crossed out, new numbers were squeezed into the margins in blue and black ink. It was a physical, tangible map of your family's social network. It held the numbers of doctors, bakers, old friends, and distant relatives. Pushing that button and watching it snap open felt incredibly satisfying, a tiny mechanical joy in a world of analog tools. If you were lucky enough to live in a truly modern architect-designed home of the era, your living room might have featured the absolute pinnacle of cozy interior architecture, the sunken seating area. Instead of arranging furniture on a flat floor, you actually step down 2 or 3 carpeted stairs into a square pit right in the middle of the round. The edges of the pit were lined with built-in sofas covered in thick, ribbed corduroy fabric, usually in shades of forest green or dark brown. The center held a low, heavy wooden coffee table. Sitting in that pit felt like being inside a warm, protective nest. The rest of the room towered above you. It forced people to face each other, creating an incredibly intimate space for deep conversations, playing board games, or sharing a glass of sherry. It was an architectural embrace. When you sat down in that sunken square, you were leaving the rest of the house behind. You were fully present with the people sitting across from you, surrounded by thick cushions and lowered ceilings. During the long, wet and freezing winter months, doing laundry presented a real challenge. Without tumble dryers, clothes had to be dried indoors. The solution was a white, plastic-coated wire rack specially designed to hook perfectly over the top of the heavy, ribbed metal radiators. When you hung damp, freshly washed clothes on the rack and turned the heating up, a very specific magic happened. The water from the clothes would slowly evaporate, releasing a deeply comforting, humid warmth into the dry winter air of the living room. The scent of washing powder would mix with the faint smell of hot metal and settling dust. It was the smell of a winter weekend. The clothes dried stiff and rough, especially the towels, which felt like sandpaper against your skin after a bath. But the sight of socks and undershirts hanging limply over the glowing warm heater meant that someone was taking care of the home. It was a visual reminder of the constant loving labor required to keep a family clean and warm. In the corner of the room, stacked among the books, there was usually a sturdy, rectangular case covered in imitation leather, fastened with shiny metal clasps. This was the record-carrying case. Before music became invisible digital files, it had weight, size, and presence. Opening the clasps revealed a row of 12-inch vinyl records, each safely housed in its beautiful, large-format cardboard sleeve. Thumbing through the records was a tactile joy. The smell of the old cardboard, mixed with the distinct, slightly chemical scent of the black vinyl discs. Taking this heavy case to a friend's house or to a party was an event. You were carrying your identity, your tastes, and your mood in a box with a handle. Carefully sliding a record out, blowing the dust off the surface, and dropping the needle into the groove required patience and respect for the music. The occasional pops and crackles were not flaws. They were the cozy crackling fire of our favorite songs. That case was a treasure chest of carefully curated sounds. Once a week, the postman delivered a thin, brightly printed paper booklet that dictated the rhythm of our evenings, the television guide. In a world with only 2 national channels, deciding what to watch was a serious family negotiation. You would sit at a table with a ballpoint pen, eagerly flipping through the crisp paper pages, looking at the schedules for the coming days. When you found a movie, a variety show, or a beloved children's program, you would draw a thick, dark circle around it. That circle was a binding contract. It meant that on Tuesday evening at 8 o'clock, the entire family would drop whatever they were doing, gather on the corduroy sofa, and stare at the bulky television set. There was no pausing, no rewinding, and no watching it later. If you missed it, it was gone. This created an incredible sense of shared national experience. The next morning at school or at work, absolutely everyone would be talking about the exact same program, because everyone had circled the same show in their paper guide. Finally, we reached the object that holds perhaps the most emotional weight of all. Hidden away in a closet for most of the year, it was brought out on special winter evenings or family birthdays. The slide projector. Setting it up was an event. The heavy curtains were pulled tight to block out the streetlights. A white sheet was sometimes pinned to the wall if you did not have a proper silver screen. The projector smelled of hot dust burning against the intense heat of the massive bulb inside. The room would fall dark, save for the bright beam of light cutting through the smoky air. Then came the sound. The loud, mechanical, incredibly satisfying click-clack of the carousel advancing to the next plastic frame. A huge, glowing image of a summer holiday in France or a snowy winter morning would suddenly illuminate the wall. The colors were incredibly rich and warm. The family would sit in the dark, sharing memories, laughing at bad haircuts, and remembering those who were no longer with us. It was pure, glowing magic. As the warm glow of the slide projector fades from our minds and the clicking of the dial stops, we realize a profound truth. We do not just miss these physical objects, we miss what they represented. We miss the slow, deliberate pace of a Sunday afternoon. We miss the feeling of our mother's kitchen, the scent of the heavy floral wallpaper, and the incredibly strong bond of family that was forged in the simple act of sharing a single cookie from a metal tin. These everyday items from the 1970s and 80s were the silent anchors of our youth. They tied us to a world that was quieter, a world where connection required effort, and where happiness was found in the warmth of a shared room rather than the glow of a private screen. If this gentle journey into the past brought a feeling of warmth to your heart, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video so we can continue to preserve these beautiful memories together. Now, I want to ask you, my dear friend, which of these items made you smile the most? And what is your favorite, most vivid memory from your childhood home? Please write your story in the comments below. Let us keep the warmth of those days alive together.